Welcome our panelists, Kenny Gluck, who until recently was Chief of Staff of the AU-UN Joint Mediation Support Team and has been part of every possible effort to bring parties together one can think of. And before that, he was Director of Operations at Médecins Sans Frontières. Our second panelist is Ahmed Adam Hussein, who was the Chief Negotiator for the Sudanese Justice and Equality Movement. And our third panelist is John Prendergast, who is the co-founder of the Enough Project. John was mentioned earlier because of the activities that Enough has done to try and monitor from great heights the atrocities going on at the moment in Kordofan, and who was in an earlier incarnation Director of African Affairs, U.S. National Security Council. I've asked Kenny to take the lead and mainly about the experience of recent negotiations, and then we'll have Ahmed Adam, who will talk about the situation in Darfur mainly, and John, who will look at the policy options that we have in the future to support peace in Sudan. So Kenny, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to Derek and Columbia for inviting us with wonderful panels. I'll be talking a little bit less about, you could say, reality, and the previous panelists, Ahmed Adam and John, will do that. I'll be trying to bring, at least from the mediation perspective, a more theoretical perspective. So if I'll put you to sleep, and then Ahmed and John can wake you up with more of, I think, an activist approach. The Darfur conflict has been remarkably resistant to attempts to solve it. The conflict is, depending on when you call it start, but certainly as a major conflict, it's in its 8th year. It has survived the breakup of a country. It's survived rounds of elections. It's survived several peace agreements, and it's survived many years of internationally supported mediation, and many people will argue that without much effect. So what I'll try to discuss now is some ideas about why that is. Why has Darfur been so resistant to internationally mediated attempts to solve it? What many people point to in the beginning is the international environment, and I think that's going to be the focus of some of the discussions now. But I think in many ways for international mediation, the international environment for mediation in Darfur was not bad. You had significant amounts of international support for the mediation. You had a lot of great powers invested in it, certainly the United States and other members of the other permanent members of the Security Council were clearly supportive of the mediation. What many people have pointed to the role of factors like the ICC as undermining the mediation. I don't think you can make a strong argument that the ICC indictments did have a decisive effect on the mediation. It did affect some ways, you could say, in a positive way. I think the government of Sudan was clearly more interested in showing that there was a peace process, in having talks going on, so that they could accuse the ICC of undermining something. The major effect that the ICC did have was not so much on the peace process, but on international support for the peace process. So as you remember, within the African Union, there are very divided opinions about the ICC. And the ICC indictments, particularly of President Bashir, did create rifts within the African Union, which you could say undermined international support for the mediation. But I would argue that none of these are the core issues of why mediation cannot go forward. And when we're talking about mediation, and this is where it'll be very different from what you've heard from previous panelists, and what I think you'll hear from Ahmed Adam and John, is that mediation is looking for mutually beneficial outcomes. a mediated solution in the conflict in Darfur, one which would likely further entrench the NCP in power. Because it's a mediation. It's not a strategy for regime change. And certainly in Dr. Luca's presentation of the CPA was revolutionary, but it in many ways did fully respect the dominance of the NCP in power in Khartoum, even though there were promises for democratization and so on enshrined in the accord, and then there's varying opinions about the degree to which this was lived up to. The internal reasons, the internal obstacles for a mediated solution in Darfur come from the structure of the armed movements and the nature of the counterinsurgency which was mounted against them. If many of you have, as a result of these two factors, you ended up with negotiations which are both very unstable and very constrained. Both parties find it very difficult to make concessions, and any concessions lead to great instability. The first side of this, and it's very simple analysis, there's two sides of this table. There's the government on one side and the armed movements on the other. How did the government of Sudan fight its counterinsurgency in Darfur? Like it did in many other of its counterinsurgencies, it didn't fight much of the war directly. It didn't raise and train an army and send the army to do it. It fights its wars through the exacerbation, you could say the manipulation, and the arming and supporting of local factions. So there are local tensions in Darfur, there are local differences, and by allying and exacerbating this, it is the key to its counterinsurgency strategy. Alex Duvall has famously called this counterinsurgency on the cheap. It's much cheaper, much easier to mount a counterinsurgency by using local proxies, which you give a strategic advantage to with air power and so on, than it is to actually raise and train an army. The difficulty for this strategy is associated with some of the horrible atrocities that you see in all of Sudan's counterinsurgencies. They're not fighting necessarily with a trained army under clear rules of command and control. It's fighting through proxies. What does this mean for the possibility of negotiations? One of the things that the government is doing with its proxies is not just arming and funding, it's making political commitments. Political commitments in terms of local political control, commitments in terms of land, commitments in terms of access to state resources. This means that any negotiation which they then engage in later is going to be very constrained. It means unraveling promises. It means unraveling commitments. Unraveling commitments to now the groups that you've armed and mobilized is both expensive. You kind of have to compensate them for the withdrawal of the promises. It's also dangerous. Dangerous in that you encourage those groups to then defect and become insurgents. So this is one of the ways in which the Sudanese government is a very constrained actor. It has a lot to fear. I'm not in a position, and I won't take the risk to decide whether the Sudanese government was honest or not in its claims that it was interested in an agreement. As the starting point of a mediation, you take that as face value, whether it's from the government or from the armed movements. But they had real risks when they engage in that. And they did say to us, if we are going to make these concessions, we have to make sure that we're only making them once, because it is an expensive and risky process. So that's on the government side, the constraints and a little bit of the instability of where its proxies, where its allies go in the course of any negotiations. What happens on the armed movement side, the other side of the table? the Darfur armed movements have had great difficulty in both their cohesion and in their coherence. And I think it's very important to look at some of the work. There's a recent book by Séverine Autesserre, who is at Columbia, I believe, at SIPA, possibly. Barnard. Is that part of Columbia?
Yeah.
Okay. She talks about, she's recently written a book which talks about the interrelationship between local conflicts in Congo, particularly in the east of the Congo and Katanga, and how that relates to national level struggles. There are similar things going on in Darfur. When you see the leadership of Darfur, the people who engage in the peace process, friends of mine like Ahmed Hussein, they are also sitting on top of many other dynamics going on in Darfur. It's a complicated place with many other dynamics and a history of both conflict with the center, but also internal conflicts. So you have a lot of shifting of lower level fighters between our movements. And so you would talk to some of the, you could say commanders, and some of the commanders who sat with us for many, many long and sometimes very boring periods in Doha, and they explained that they had actually fought for many different causes. Some of them had fought in South Sudan against the SPLA, and then they had fought periods of time against some of the other armed movements. Then they had switched and fought with the armed movements. There was a very sad moment in the period leading up to the referendum. One of these commanders who I was asking, who had fought in the past in the south against the SPLA and had fought both on the government side and on the armed movement side, I asked him, just as a guess, where do you think you're going to be in years from now? This is shortly before the referendum. He said we're probably going to be fighting in the south against the SPLA again. And this is one of the realities of armed movements, not only in Darfur, in many countries. Leadership of our movements are very often have a political vision and so on, but in mobilizing fighters, you need a different set of incentives, sometimes collective incentives. You're encouraging people to fight for you for the betterment of a collective. Sometimes selective incentives, where you're looking to motivate them by particular benefits that they might get in the course of a rebellion or after a rebellion's victory. And these are extremely difficult to manage when you're talking about a variety of a variety of armed movements, which are asymmetric within themselves. There's a lot written about asymmetric negotiations. The different Darfur armed movements were asymmetric within themselves. They had different visions for the country. They often had different communities which supported them, and they often had different relationships with the center. And this lack of cohesion means that as you could in trying to negotiate, it's very difficult for them to make concessions because many of them were scared of losing either their base or their fighting forces. And secondly, as they do engage in concessions, they face fragmentation and realignments. And going back to the first point of, again, if the Sudanese government negotiators saying any agreement that we make, if we're really going to make concessions, has to be the final one. We can't do this repetitively. This lack of cohesion and lack of coherence, this sense that the Darfur armed movements are a weak coalition which is in flux and constantly realigning, makes the conclusion of successful negotiations almost impossible. So this is part of the experience of many years of negotiating in Darfur. the mediation felt that it needed to compensate for this fluidity and constraints on making concessions by involving communities directly in the peace process. And this was the proposal. It was a proposal of the chief mediator Bosole to try to get communities directly involved, principally because if communities are directly involved and they are committed to the concessions that all communities would be making, including the pro-government communities which sided with the government, this would provide an element of stability which the belligerents in the conflict couldn't necessarily provide, meaning having displaced communities who are facing issues of land occupation in the peace process directly, and so that they can see what concessions are being made, what concessions their communities might want to make in the interests of peace, and so that communities which have been involved in land occupation, which is also a significant factor in the conflict in Darfur, can also see that, yes, can also see that the concessions that they're making, that they sign off on them and that they don't, that they are reassured that those concessions don't threaten the long-term interests and viability of their communities. I was convinced that both communities which supported the government, communities which were not involved in the government, and many of the communities which actually had their separate interests, and they weren't necessarily in favor of the armed movements or in favor of the government, they could find those compromises which would allow the basis of a more peaceful future for Darfur, around which you could organize a successful negotiation between the armed movements and the government. That didn't happen for a variety of reasons, but it does lay some of the dilemmas which Sudan is going to continue to face. You still have conflict in Darfur. You have a resumption of conflict now in Blue Nile, South Kordofan, and the ability to, there is a need for a single national process in North Sudan. The ability of organizing a coherent negotiation between clear parties is still, unfortunately, very, very far away. And that the only way out of that is finding some other center of gravity around which a negotiation can be built. Sadly, the international community is very ill-equipped to organize this, and the Sudanese government is very ill-inclined to accept such a process. And this is why, unfortunately for North Sudan in the near future, we're not likely to see the basis for a successful mediation unless some of that more broader popular process can happen. And that's going to be a question of where the international community places its political capital and where the government in Khartoum sees its political possibilities in light of all the changes in the region. So that's the pessimistic picture which I'll leave you with. But you'll get the optimism, I'm sure, from Ahmed Hussein and from John right now.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. This was not at all soporific, but was depressing. So Ahmed, you've been on the inside of this, and how do you see this? Please, sure, come to the podium.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking University of Columbia and the School of International and Public Affairs. And in particular, I would like to thank Professor Derek and his magnificent team who helped organize this conference at this juncture of our country history. And also, I would like to extend my appreciation and thanks to the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University here, particularly to Professor Barkan, David Phillips, and Daniel, actually for their great efforts in helping the people of Darfur and people of Sudan, because I know that they held a lot of workshops and conferences trying to raise the awareness about the crisis in Darfur. I'm also very honored to be here with my friend John Prendergast, the long-standing friend and true friend of Sudan, actually, both Sudan, South and North, and in particular people of Darfur as well. And my friend Kenny, with whom we were in Doha for a long time, trying actually to bring about peace to Darfur. But actually, that trial has failed recently. I think the time and the place of this conference is of great significance. Having met here in New York and at Columbia University, and with this magnificent audience, I think it helped raise the awareness about the current situation in Sudan, and two Sudans actually. Because if we fix Sudan, I believe if we fix Sudan, that I think is crucial for the south of Sudan, the Republic of South Sudan, and crucial also for the entire region and to the agenda of peace and security actually worldwide. I wish I could have some good news for you from Sudan. Actually, the situation there, both the humanitarian situation and the security situation and the political situation, of course, is so gloomy. Right now, we don't have any political horizon. That's why, in my presentation, I would like to cover the humanitarian and security aspect, as well as the political aspect of the problem in Darfur. But right now, I cannot say that I can talk only about Darfur. We used to talk about Darfur when Darfur was a single crisis or single conflict. But right now, there are many conflicts in Sudan. There is South Kordofan conflict, which is a case of genocide and ethnic cleansing. There is a case of the Blue Nile, which is ongoing genocide as well. And the east of Sudan also is a time-bombed, leave alone actually the far north and the dams, people who are right now actually trying to realize actually their aspiration as citizens, but the government actually is killing them and violating their human rights. I will cover, as I said, just briefly the humanitarian security situation, as well as the humanitarian situation and the political aspect of the problem, namely about the political process. And after that, I will conclude by some suggested points for the exit strategy. I know that the government of Sudan, as well as the UNIMID chief, are saying that the situation in Darfur is improving, or situation in Darfur is getting better. But actually, that's not the case on the ground. The case on the ground, the humanitarian situation as well as the security situation is bleak and catastrophic. I can just give you some example about security situation. As we speak, there is gross violation and harassment and attack and terror of campaign actually against the ITPs all over Darfur. Just one example which happened last week, that the attack against civilians and the ITPs in Zamzam ITP camps, which is near Al-Fashir. There is components of the police, which is called Abu Tera. Officially, actually, they are police reserve, but they gave them a uniform of the police. And actually, they attacked the ITPs, and they killed one person and left 6 wounded. The people of that camp actually connected with and contacted with UNIMID to come and to save them. But actually UNIMID came next day after actually people get killed and actually their stores get looted by the Abu Tera, which is a part of the police. And this component of the police and this force of the police actually are surrounding this camp. And this camp is just 5 meters from one of the UNIMID sectors. Part of the features of the security situation right now in Darfur, also the ongoing offensive, which is genocidal offensive and ethnic cleansing offensive. The aim of this is to wipe out certain communities from Darfur. In Jabal Marra, which is in South Darfur and West Darfur, as well as the Eastern Darfur. Actually, they wipe completely a lot of communities from there because the government thinks that these communities are supporting the movements, while they are just civilians who are trying just to live in their country. And this, the result of this offensive actually wipe out a lot of populations from the East Jabal Marra mountains, Shangal Tubaya, Dar es Salaam, Khorab Bashi, Khazan Jadid, Muhajiriya, and Mishring. All these areas actually in West Darfur as well in South Darfur. And this campaign of ethnic cleansing, which is aimed to wipe these communities, recently actually intensified in East Darfur. And the target of this campaign in East Darfur is Zagawa. Kibir, I think the wali of the North Darfur, organized some militias, local militias, and targeted the civilian population. The result is tens of people actually get killed, and about 2,000 actually displaced. Even they cannot find a place to shelter them inside Darfur. They went to Kordofan, and from Kordofan actually they put pressure on them, put pressure on the authorities there to force them to leave. And they live right now there in Al-Dain, under the support of the leadership of the tribal leadership. Babu Nimir, the leader of Rizegat. This is happening every day, but there is no reports about it. There is no exposure about all this kind of thing. The air bombardment actually is still continuing. Right now, as we speak, the bombardment actually happening almost every day, targeting civilian populations, their livestock, as well as the water sources inside Darfur, in North Darfur or South Darfur, and even in Western Darfur. These have been going on for a long time. Also, the idea is to drive all these communities out from these rural areas, so that the movements or resistance movement cannot find any kind of help or something. But actually, this is not about the movement, namely, this is about, racial ideology, which is trying to impose, trying to drive all those who doesn't believe in the ruling elite who are leading the country right now, and they believe in Arabism. And this is going on for a long time right now. And this is the core of the Darfur problem. They use the religious ideology actually to kill the over 2 million in the South Sudan, and now they are using the racial ideology actually to kill the people of Darfur. And this is actually the context of the ongoing genocide right now in Darfur. All the Darfuris are Muslims, but actually they don't belong to the same ethnic cleansing, ethnic group of the ruling minority. That's why actually they are killing them, and this is give you the real context of what's going on. During this, there is some forms of violations against the ITPs. Namely, there is a systematic campaign, rape campaign actually in Darfur right now. OCs are recorded and unexposed actually by many, even by UNIMIT. This average of about 3 cases a day. Just last month, actually, there are 25 reported cases of rape in Darfur. This has been actually going on for a long time. And you know that people, they normally in Darfur, they don't report actually the rape cases because of this stigma and the traditional, beliefs and all good stuff. But this is one of the most grave violations of human rights against women inside the ITP camps. Also, the other forms of violations is the looting and intimidation, threat and accuse, and always they accuse the ITPs of maybe hiding arms or belong to the rebels. But that always gets used as a trigger to commit crimes and to loot the ITPs in their camps. Also, there is another form of intimidation and violation of human rights for ITPs is the choke points. Whether you go, in South Darfur or West Darfur, wherever you go in Darfur, you find these checkpoints, and always actually managed by the government militias as well as the police and the armed and security apparatus. The aim of this action is to destroy the life of the people of Darfur. And there is a real and deliberate kind of policy of impoverishment against the people of Darfur right now. It's going on. If we talk about this dimension of the security situation, we're supposed actually to have the UNIMIT, which is the core force, or the only force which is mandated by the Security Council to protect the people of Darfur, civilian population, as well as the ITPs in Darfur. But UNIMIT in the eyes of the people of Darfur is helpless, because everybody knows in Darfur that they cannot even protect themselves, and actually fully manipulated by the government of Sudan, even their reports actually. I don't going to personalize everything, and this is in any way is not undermining the role of the foot soldiers of the UNIMIT, but I'm talking about the political leadership of UNIMIT. this political leadership of UNIMIT is fully manipulated by the government of Sudan, and we see this reports about the improvement of humanitarian situation and security situation every day. And that kind of reports actually is always used and exploited by the government of Sudan to advance their propaganda to say everything is okay in Darfur, while actually on the ground things are not okay. Right now, the chief of UNIMIT also is not focusing actually in the peacemaking. We know that the mandate of the UNIMIT is supposed to protect the civilian population. And that mandate actually, right now, he's focusing actually in peace making, not in peace building. And you can see that, how UNIMIT actually, failed actually to protect the people of Darfur on the ground. The humanitarian situation also is bleak. Just, that the WFP actually admitted that he has reduced they reduced their ration of food by 50%, while the ITPs are saying just 75%. They only receive 25% from the food or something. And you know that there is eviction of 13 NGOs, and this resulted of shortage of food as well as the shortage of medicine and all this kind of things. So what I say is the humanitarian situation is very catastrophic, but there is no report about it and there is no exposure about it. What we need is real action actually, so that to improve the humanitarian situation and security situation. And the humanitarian situation and security situation cannot improve also in the absence of political horizon and absence of peace prospect. And we know that Doha failed completely to achieve any kind of lasting peace for Darfur. And as a matter of fact, there are 2 documents actually resulted from the Darfur political process, 2004, I was there, 2004 until 2011. 2 documents, which is the DPA. DPA actually failed completely. Minni Minnawi, the one who signed, the single faction who signed that document, right now is in opposition, as well as the and now Doha document. Doha document is not signed with one of the faction conflicting parties which is fighting on the ground. It's signed by movement which has no any kind of military capacity or something, but actually created just to sign any kind of document in the name of Darfur, because the international community and the mediation, they just want to deal with the status quo. I'm very glad that Kenny was very honest about this. So they want just to deal with the status quo, and they don't want to find any kind of a win-win kind of deal or lasting solution. Our experience actually during the negotiations, that the government of Sudan doesn't believe in a political solution to this conflict at all. They always believe in a military solution. But as I said, Doha is not going to bring about any kind of peace. It's going to doom to failure. There is no question about that, because Doha is actually, in short, Doha's document failed to address the fundamental and legitimate rights and aspirations of the people of Darfur and provide them with a symbolic victory for their sufferings and sacrifices. On the contrary, the Doha document legitimized and strengthened the status quo and the rule of al-Bashir regime, the very person who committed and is still committing genocide against the people of Darfur. Hence, al-Bashir is now using the Doha document to dismantle forcefully the IDP camps, further divide the people of Darfur, and continue his genocidal campaign under the cover of implementing the Doha document. Right now, the main focus for al-Bashir is to dismantle the ITP camps, because for them, the ITP camps is a symbol of the Darfur problem. So they just want to take it away, and that actually mission assigned to Tijani Sese. And any kind of that dismantling, actually, that is a real breach to international humanitarian law. But as I said, Doha document is a flawed document, which resulted from a flawed, political process. And one of the main shortcomings of that political process, and I think my friend Kenny will agree with me, that the regime lacked the good faith and genuine political will to reach an equitable and negotiated solution. The regime position throughout the course of the negotiations on Darfur since 2004 has been consistently denying the political nature of the Sudanese conflict in Darfur. Hence, al-Bashir regime has been imposing military and security solution in Darfur. It has never come to negotiating table with a good faith. It has been exploiting the negotiations as a buying time game and public relation exercise. This for a long time, since 2004. The mediation lacked the sufficient and adequate mandate to address holistically the root causes of the conflict with its national dimensions. The mediation lacked strategy and the required capacity to deal with the complexity of the problem, Moreover, the mediation also lacked the needed leverage over the parties. The two heads of the mediation, which is AU and UN, paralyzed it and made it ineffective. The weakness of the mediation in Doha encouraged the host country, which is the state of Qatar, to take advantage and hijack the role of the mediation, which resulted in a negative impact on the Doha process. So that the outcome of Doha is not actually something mediated. It's not even a negotiated kind of deal or something. It's just, Qatar, the relation between the state of the country of Sudan or the government of Sudan and then the state of Qatar. And you know that they have a lot of vested interest in this kind of regard or something. So their priority is not the issue of Darfur at all. Also, the role of the international community, the role of the international community in the Darfur political process has been characterized by divisions, competition, a lack of coherent and concerted approach. And we know that, and Biki doesn't like Basuli, and Basuli doesn't like, Amgambari, and every one of them, just want to take the lead of mediation or something. Everybody knows that. And even, the expert who, claim that they have expertise in Darfur, some of them, they became Zagawa, some of them, they became Arab, and actually they tribalized the whole thing, and this actually led to the failure. Also, I would like to say that the movement also should share the responsibility of the shortcomings of the process for failing to agree on a common ground and a single negotiating position, because I want to please my friend Kenny, and I want also to be objective on this. The failure of resolving Darfur actually, with the situation right now in the Blue Nile and South Kordofan, has put the country in a war, with itself. There is a national deadlock right now, and it's still national stalemate like now. I cannot say there is just problem about Darfur, but there is a national problem right now in South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and all these kind of places. You cannot just single out just one problem and say that's the problem. And you see that after al-Bashir, after the separation of the South, al-Bashir put it very clear, as just Lucas said it, that he wants to impose one single identity in the country, which is the Islamic and Arabic identity in the country. And this in itself means a declaration of war, because Sudan is a diverse country. You cannot just rule it with kind of single identity. I guess I would like to conclude in this point. It is efficiently evident that if this regime continues in power, Sudan would never enjoy peace, democracy, or stability. The regime will never allow any strategic and peaceful relationship with the new nation in the south to flourish. Instead, it will continue its destabilization policy and work by proxy in the south. Therefore, al-Bashir regime poses a real threat to the safety and the livelihoods of all Sudanese and South Sudanese. In order to protect the civilians, to promote democracy, justice, and ensure peace and stability in both Sudans, the region as a whole, the regime must go. It is time for al-Bashir to go. I propose some strategies, just two or three points about the current humanitarian situation as well as the political situation. About the proposed exit strategy, one, international community and UN Security Council must act under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter to guarantee an unimpeded and immediate humanitarian access, including cross-border humanitarian assistance to all the needy in the war zones in Sudan. Two, the case of Sudan must be recognized as a case of responsibility to protect. Therefore, the international community through the UN Security Council must take all the necessary measures to impose a no-fly zone over Darfur, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, to ensure full protection of the civilian population, as well as to guarantee the flow of the humanitarian assistance. If they can do it actually in Libya, I think they should do it actually even in Darfur. And our people of Darfur and South Kordofan and Blue Nile, they deserve the same kind of treatment. Three, the UN Security Council must support the work of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, by implementing the arrest warrants which have been issued by the ICC against the perpetrators, including al-Bashir. And also we call upon the Security Council to establish a committee to investigate the human rights violation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile. There are at least two options to break the current national deadlock in Sudan. A peaceful democratic transition in Sudan can be realized through a meaningful negotiated settlement or through a national and inclusive constitutional conference, which should lead the country to a new era of consensus on the fundamental issues, democratic transition and structural change. Or B, other necessary forms of change should be considered if al-Bashir continues to be an obstacle or a spoiler of peace, including a scenario of protected popular uprising. This option needs strong and sophisticated coordination between Sudanese revolutionary forces, which is known as Cauda, which is established recently and composed of 4 main movements actually in Sudan. They have to coordinate with the political forces, including the political parties, youth, student, women, civil society, organizations, trade unions, and others in order to create an inclusive and credible democratic national alliance as a viable alternative to the Bashir regime. But from what I see is, if al-Bashir stays in power, actually we are not going to have two viable states in Sudan, whether in the South Sudan or in North Sudan. What we need, and our people actually in the South, they need, is to have a friendly regime actually in Khartoum, so that actually to help them develop their country. But with al-Bashir in power, I don't think that things will be in a good shape actually in the north or in the south. This is for sure, because the strategy of al-Bashir is to maintain power, because power for them is immunity from the ICC and from the justice of the Sudanese people. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, so mediation has its limits because one assumes that both parties are acting in good faith. And I think Ahmed has shown that in some cases mediation becomes a waste of time. So where do we go from here, John? What's left?
Gee, thanks, Dirk. I think any student that is still here after nearly 3 hours and 6 speakers should get at least 3 course credits. Or perhaps a free SEPA-led trip to Khartoum for Christmas that you could volunteer to, one or the other, whichever costs less, of course. And I also must say, Kenny, you said Ahmed's presentation was going to be optimistic. Yeah. There's a tough panel I'm on here, I'm bleeding. The bar for optimism has clearly been set very, very low, so I will try my best to meet it. It is really hard to imagine that things could get worse in Sudan today. There are, I would count, and maybe others would have a different mathematical model, but 6 fronts that the Sudanese government is fighting on now. This Darfur front, which has been adequately addressed here, Abyei, which of course they ethnically cleansed, and then now it's at peace, but it's, the people are not there. South Kordofan and Blue Nile, which have also been addressed. The southern militias that the government of Sudan is financing to undermine stability in the south, and then, of course, directly the north-south skirmishes that we've seen over the last 48 hours that are as worrisome to me as the infamous town of Badame was to any Ethiopian or Eritrean back in 1998, which led to a war there that cost nearly 100,000 people's lives. There's also, of course, vicious repression of civil society in the north and brewing insurgencies in the east and the northeast and the far north. But it actually could get worse. Okay, I'm gonna go down and then I'm gonna come back up. Don't worry. These skirmishes and all the accumulated failures at the negotiating table, another round, of course, on the oil resources sharing deal has collapsed. All of these different factors, you could see potential for a resumption of the war between the North and the South, now two states, Sudan and South Sudan. You could see famine emerge in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile regions because of the government's use of starvation as a war weapon, blocking humanitarian access to those areas. Nevertheless, there is, within the dangers that Kenny and Ahmed have outlined, I think, so clearly, there is major opportunity. I thought I would throw that appropriate Chinese reference into the danger and opportunity reference in because of China's big role. So I want to present to you what I would say are, very briefly, 10 opportunities inherent in this dangerous moment. Opportunities for moving beyond the box that we're sort of trapped in, that external policies, U.S. policy, other governments' policies have been trapped in, stuck in for a long time with deadly results. So these 10, I'm sure if the subway ride had been a little longer and I could have done a little more editing, I could have narrowed it down and edited it down to 6 or 7. But I'm just going to go with these 10. I'm actually going out there for the first time, so if a couple of them are slightly repetitive, I apologize. The refunds in the back there for the session here. First opportunity I see for Sudan, and they're in no order, by the way, of course, because again, didn't have enough time. But first is the recent arrest warrant been issued by the International Criminal Court for the defense minister of Sudan, Hussein. This now means that Hussein and President Bashir are both now indicted for crimes against humanity. This is the top of the chain of command that has committed the vast bulk of crimes against humanity that have been committed during the past 2 decades in Sudan. And I think it's important to clarify and to focus in, because we're seeing a consolidation of control in Sudan by the Sudan Armed Forces, with Bashir and Hussein certainly arguably 2 of the most influential in the cabal that runs the country. A real marginalization of the civilian actors, and even those that had some potentially, arguably, somewhat moderating influence on government policies. So to focus in on the criminal culpability of the leadership of the Sudanese regime, I think, is a terribly important development, rooted in international law. Second opportunity that emerges now during these last months is that now that, because of course China's role in Sudan has been so destructive for so long as the principal sort of guardian and supporter of the Sudanese regime on the Security Council and international fora around the world. Its primary commercial partner. I wouldn't expect China to have done anything differently. If the Saudi Arabians face some kind of international problem, the United States would be first and foremost its biggest defender. It's just the way it is. It's realpolitik. But now China has a problem, because more oil is in the south than is in Sudan. So they now have to play both sides of the fence. This opens up a brand new day in international diplomacy. It makes everything very unpredictable, and it provides an incredibly important opportunity for the United States and other countries who want to press forward with some form of a compromise on some of the issues that divide the 2 states or create problems internally within Sudan. It creates an opportunity. Again, any of these 10 by themselves, maybe not, but together can have an impact. A third opportunity is the regional context of the Arab Spring. This is Sudan's neighborhood. The countries that surround it in North Africa and the Middle East, Sudan, the Sudanese regime has always identified with. And I'm fascinated to sort of encapsulate the 3, what I would boil down, the 3 essential sort of guidelines of U.S. policy that have emerged over these last few months in the context of the Arab Spring. They have been, I would argue, 1, respect, and these are the demands that they're making of many of the governments that are facing tremendous internal dissent. 1, respect universal rights of your citizens. 2, don't use violence against your own citizens. And 3, engage in dialogue for meaningful reform. Sudanese regime isn't doing any of these 3. In fact, doing the opposite. Perhaps arguably more violently and defiantly, arguably, than any of the other states in the region. So I view the context and the unpredictability of that context as something that could potentially be an opportunity. The fourth opportunity I would look at is the formation, and we'll see if it has the legs to carry forward its promise, the formation of an opposition coalition, this now called Sudanese Revolutionary Front, which brings together the vast majority, I would say, of armed opposition and increasingly unarmed political elements in the north. They're reaching out to civil society groups and other political parties. It's a very interesting next iteration from what many of you remember as the National Democratic Alliance during the North-South War and the effort to try to create what many people talked about as the revolution of the peripheries, the people who had been disenfranchised since independence or even arguably before, rising up against a very corrupt and despotic and warped state and attempting to alter the terms of power there. The fifth opportunity is that the independence now South Sudan no longer constrains the policies of the United States and other countries. I've certainly saw, as any of us would, and I'm sure Kenny could have seen it very firsthand as a negotiator in Darfur, that any effort to try to deal with internal problems within Sudan itself was undermined by the sanctity, understandably, of trying to get South Sudan's referendum to the finish lines peacefully and successfully and on time. So any other effort that was made to try to address conflicts in other parts of the country was always second to dealing with the South. Now the South is an independent state. That crutch is no longer available to policymakers who don't want to deal with the fundamental issue of the abuse of power in Khartoum, and it just makes it more stark. It makes it harder to play the three-card Monte that's been going on here policy-wise for so long. The sixth opportunity, I think, is the at least maybe other countries, but certainly from the discussions that I've had over the last month or two, that the U.S. government increasingly recognizes that there is that the central problem in Sudan is this abuse of power in the center, and that if you try to address these problems piecemeal, and if you don't deal with the question of the center, that it's unlikely that any of the policies that the U.S. is pursuing now and other countries would pursue in support of peace and development and stability and human rights protections in Sudan are going to succeed. I think just the literal recognition, the cognitive recognition of this fact, which has been utterly obvious to anyone who's set foot into Sudan in the last 22 years, or much longer, but it takes a little while for the U.S. to catch up. We understand that. So here they appear to, and now the question is, what are they going to do about it? Seventh opportunity, I would say, is this sort of, and this is a very unpredictable one, this what I would call an R2P moment. You know, the responsibility to protect, many of you probably are supporters of or champions of in conceptual terms, that we ought to, you know, the idea that if state which has the first and foremost responsibility to protect its own populations, if it fails to do that, or if it actually becomes the engine of abuse of those populations, then the responsibility to protect then falls on the international community in some way. That's the level of specificity the international sort of legal framework provides, so it's not very clear. Nevertheless, you can run with that if you want to, and we've seen 3 utterly unprecedented cases in 2011 rooted in the responsibility to protect that I don't know if we'll ever see anything like it again, but Libya, Ivory Coast, and in my view, a non-military one, South Sudan, were 3 cases where R2P was at the center of what U.S. and other countries were pursuing, at least in the first instance, and then you got other efforts to try to defend civilians, protect civilians, and promote freedom, to promote the aspirations of people, and that certainly we saw in Tunisia and Egypt and Yemen, and now in Syria. The 8th opportunity is certainly what Kenny and Ahmed have talked to you about tonight as part of a larger theme, the demise of this Darfur peace process. I mean, it's dead. Anybody who tries to revive it is just hallucinating in its current format. And sadly, we have many within the U.S. government, including our special representative who focuses on Darfur, still talking about the Doha deal as the centerpiece of peace and potential future peace in Sudan. They'll get over it. But there's the failure of Doha, the failure of the popular consultations in Blue Nile and South Kordofan, the failure of the agreement that was brokered by Meles Zenawi
in Addis that was going to allow for a number of things to happen along the border areas and in South Kordofan and Blue Nile. Bashir immediately reneged on that deal. A series of agreements which were individual region-specific agreements that have failed. The government of Sudan, this process, this attempt to try to get these piecemeal deals has completely failed. We, I think, hopefully, again, will catch up to the recognition that we have to deal with the main issue, which is the center. And the abuse of power at the center, and that these individual deals, region-specific deals, Darfur peace processes, South Kordofan peace processes, Abyei-specific peace processes, are doomed to failure because Khartoum just plays one against the other and never ends up agreeing to anything or implementing anything. They'll agree to anything, but then they'll implement nothing. The ninth opportunity is that evidence is accumulating. The 21st century is offering us with all kinds of new tools that we didn't have before to prove. You know, I can recall certainly for many years, much of the rest of the world denying that what was going on in Darfur was happening because there wasn't sort of the direct visual proof. So having the satellite imagery going in, the UN rapporteurs reports that are just piling up. And now, I understand, is just about to begin an investigation by supported, funded, maybe undertaken by the United States with some other countries that will gather evidence about the war crimes that have been committed in Blue Nile and South Kordofan. They did the same thing in 2004 as a precursor to Colin Powell concluding that genocide had occurred in Darfur. So again, on its own, not necessarily a game changer, but as part of a larger group of things, may be important. Finally, the 10th item, and maybe one that could spur action given the unpredictability of events of this very, very strange year of 2011, is that if, and I mentioned this already earlier, but if famine does unfold, and we hope it doesn't, if it does unfold in the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, and starving babies start appearing on television screens because some courageous reporters get up there and get pictures. Sometimes it takes those kinds of visuals to get the world to act. Certainly we saw that in Somalia 6 months ago or 4 months ago, and when the U.S. and the rest of the world was doing nothing about people and the incredible crisis they were facing, humanitarian crisis. But once they saw the starving babies, it led to a whole set of actions that have arguably, some of them potentially going to make the thing worse, but at least it pushed the buttons. So the buttons would be pushed, I think, for some people only if they actually saw this kind of visual evidence. Otherwise, they're just burying their heads in the sand. There's just a difficult moment in history. In conclusion, your favorite 2 words, isn't it? In the last year, I would say U.S. policy has gone out of the box, on Egypt, on Libya, on Syria, on Ivory Coast, in very creative ways. We moved the ball forward in some cases, or at least stood on principle in others. And conversely, on Sudan's internal abuses, which arguably have simply no parallel globally in terms of the scope and scale of human rights abuses being committed today by this regime, the U.S. has stayed inside the box, despite the tremendous evidence, and has been very predictable and plodding in the approach. Now that the South is free, now that these other 9 opportunities exist, I think the time is coming to focus on dealing directly with the main engine of instability, the main problem at the center of all of this human suffering in Sudan, which is the regime in Khartoum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. Amazing that you managed to give a positive twist to what is, in every respect, such a very dismal situation. Open the floor to questions. Identify yourself, make it a question, not a monologue, and tell us to whom the question is addressed. You have the floor, sir.
My name is Hajjoj. I work with a nonviolent group in Sudan called Garifna. I want to say one thing, that I agree with all of them that what we're talking about now is regime change. What I want to ask about is how can we support that regime change from a nonviolent method as to start with? And I want Ahmed to talk about the protected nonviolent method. And by protected, do you mean arms? And how does arms work with uprising, which is nonviolent? And I'm wondering, because you work with GEM and also work with humanitarian, and you're here on a human rights thing, how does armed and humanitarian work together in this?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah.
Ahmed, start.
Yes, that we can match all of them, because actually, taking arms actually is not a choice, for the movements, resistance movement, whether in Darfur or in the South Sudan before or any place. People carrying arms because the government of Sudan actually pushed them to carry arms. Because if you don't carry arms, you cannot defend your people, and you cannot defend yourself, and you could not defend the aspiration of your people. This is for very sure, because al-Bashir put it very clear that if you want your right, if you want to realize your aspiration, we don't give you aspiration. You cannot realize them until you go there and carry arms, and then you can get them. And this is clear actually from the recent history of Sudan. He cannot negotiate with anyone who just want to negotiate with him peacefully or something. This is for sure. For us, the armed resistance, it's not something represent or is our choice, something we've been pushed to do it. Right now, actually, we established this COUD alliance, which is the National Sudanese Revolutionary Front, which consists of 4 movements: the SPLM North, GEM, and SLA Minna Minna, as well as SLA Abdel Wahid Noor. And this is not just a military kind of alliance. This is also a political alliance. We are reaching out right now the civil society. We are reaching out political parties and different components of our society. Because if you go right now, want just to do any kind of uprising or peaceful kind of confrontation with the regime is going to kill you. And I think that the experience of Garifna is very clear, and very clear example, because the entire Sudan is just militias. Salah Ghosh, has militias. Al-Bashir has own militias. Nafi al-Nafi has own militias. Everybody actually in this regime has their own militias. How you are going to fight them? What you are saying right now, we are just want to actually to bring together the peaceful demonstration and uprising, and to be protected actually by resistance movement. But we are all together actually, we have the democratic agenda, because at the end of the day, we don't want actually Sudan to continue in this dictatorship. We want Sudan actually to have a democratic government. This is what we are looking for. If you can achieve it with a minimum kind of cost, we don't have problem. If you can achieve it peacefully, also we don't have problem. But with the Bashir regime, you cannot achieve it just peacefully. Simple as that, because this is the reality, and this is actually the actual situation that the regime is focusing on its militias, to confront any kind of peaceful uprising. Thank you.
Thanks. Next questioner.
Mutasim Adam, Sudanese American. My question is to Mr. Kenny Clark. To what extent do you think the international community helped and encouraged in creation and fragmentation of the movement through their efforts of movement unification and the lack of criteria to identify the negotiating parties, and which resulted in LGM to sign the DDPD?
That seems to be also for Ahmed mainly. You want to come in on that, Kenny?
Directed to Kenny.
I think there is a role in the international community in the creation of the fragmentation of the movements. I think it's particularly coming from Abuja, the Abuja Agreement, which was unpopular within Darfur and which was contested among the movements. I think that's when you saw the most radical proliferation of new movements. I think that the international community is definitely was not able to deal with the situation of proliferation of movements, which we saw in 2007 and 2008. But the attempts, which were not from the mediation side, to unify movements starting from 2009, partly because Chief Mediator Basole didn't believe in it. He said that's not the mediation's job to unify movements. But many states felt it was a real issue, and it was principally the United States and Libya who were working on unification of the movements, and which ended up in the creation of LJM. The question, I think the real question after Abuja is that there was a proliferation of movements, and that even worse than that, there was a free-floating mass of combatants who were floating between political leaders. And that's a situation which is extremely hard to deal with for the international community, but it also is not a situation in which provides a basis for mediation. The international community was not willing to consider other actions, and I think the investment in UNIMID shows that it was not willing or able to invest in other actions. So they leave mediation as you could say a fig leaf for inaction. And I think that the international community does have that blame to lay at its footsteps.
You want to come in on that one?
Just to add
Very
something,
briefly, because I have 4 minutes.
The international community actually wasn't interested in unifying the movements. And even, people are talking about the division of the movement, which actually prolonged the peace process. I think the prime responsibility actually for this prolonging of the suffering of the people, that the government of Sudan, because they don't believe actually in any kind of political solution. The movements used to be two movements actually in Abuja. We used to have one negotiating, negotiating position. But at the end of the day, when the Robert Zuli came there and hijacked the whole process in Abuja, actually they pushed us to divide our position, because when we come that we want to come together, as three movement or something, they said no, Abdullah should come, separately, and then game separately, because the idea at that time to divide the movement so that they can push the fixed deal. So the international community is not interested at all, and some of them, as I said, they divide the movement, the regional community as well, the international community. Some of them, they support this movement and that movement, because they want to weaken the movement, so that to say that the problem is on the movement, and then to pass some sort of a deal which secure the status quo in Sudan. That's the main thing. Because they are not for structural change, they are only actually for some sort of a status quo, because they want to deal with the Bashir regime. I don't know for many reasons, but actually this is the reality, and this is the situation actually during the political process. Thank you.
Thanks. Now, to use our time efficiently, each of the three questioners who are still standing get a very quick chance to ask the questions. You take notes, and then we'll take the answers en masse. Madam, you have the floor.
My name is Hind Al-Shazali, Sudanese lawyer living in Brooklyn. My question is for the panel. I would like to thank them all. And my question for Kenny, from his perspective as a mediator, and Ahmed as one of the movement, and John as like NGO, I guess. Yeah. So, who is the spoiler in peace process in all these? I would like to hear from each of you. Thank you.
Great. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Hamza Ibrahim. I'm from Darfur People Association of Brooklyn. My question to Kenny, international community, the head of Ban Ki-moon, he condemned when this rebel group arrests when they united, because he condemned them and he said he don't accept it. So why the international community? They condemn when the Darfur people and the South Kurdistan people and Blue Nile, they want to be united, and they condemn it, they don't want that. So they say they want to stick in the peace process of Doha. The second, international community also, I have a question for them, because in Zamzam, I'm from Zagawa tribe. The case, Ahmad, he said, this is happening because one of the Sudanese army tried to rape the girls. So these people, they went over there, they killed them, and they have a problem over there. So that's one correction. So what they did, they worked with the Sudan government. They dig the camps, the Darfur camps, so they put the people inside. You can't move freely. You have to come from one door. You have to come checked by the Sudanese army. So why the international community help the Sudanese government for this? Because the equipment, the engineering, all of them from the UNIMID. And another thing, the UNIMID also helped the Sudanese government 50 pickup trucks to the Sudan armed forces.
It's
to
becoming
kill
a,
the
it's becoming a
Darfurians.
statement.
And another question for John.
Question, yeah.
Yes, for John. How affect the Libyan guns and the money affecting the whole Africa? Because the Sudan government, the Bashir himself, he said, I help the Libyan level, and right now we get what we want. And right now, the guns, we hear that in South Sudan and South Kordofan, the using is the Libyan guns. So how affect these guns? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last questioner.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is Josephine Roos. I'm a former CEPA student, and I just returned from Jonglei, where I've been carrying out a conflict analysis there. And my question is foremost to Mr. Deng, but I'm happy if you would like to fill in as well. A lot of you have been telling me about the complexities and a lot of different conflicts going on at different levels in Sudan. However, what we found and what we were looking at, particularly in South Sudan, was that there was a lot of ethnic violence going on. The question that I would like to ask is more particularly about the ethnic violence going on in South Sudan. When we left our research site, 600 people were killed in a clash between Dinka and the Murle. And I would like to hear a little bit more what the government of South Sudan can do to work against that.
Yeah, on that there's also Mareka Shomeira's study on the root causes of violence in South Sudan. So it's a good question. Each of the panelists, and maybe you want to have a few words, and then we'll bring it to a close. Just in sequence, Kenny.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. It's very good to see that there's a Darfuri community in Brooklyn. I didn't know that when I lived in Brooklyn. The question of the spoiler, the question of the spoiler, it's to decide which side, it's a controversial issue in the literature because a spoiler in Stedman's original uses is always a negative thing. That's why they're called a spoiler. To decide which side is the spoiler, you have to decide in your mind what is the appropriate solution, and then which side is refusing that solution then becomes the spoiler. As the mediation, I think sometimes to the dismay of some of the movements, the mediation said, we are not here to decide what is the solution for Sudan. We are here to facilitate a dialogue between the armed movements and the government. It's going to be their agreement. So from the point of view of the mediation, at least during the negotiations, we could not say which side was the spoiler. Well, we could see that they were not coming to an agreement, and that's what we were trying to work on. But it's very common for both sides to urge the mediation to denounce the other. But you can the mediation can only decide which side is the spoiler if the mediation knows what is the right solution for Sudan. And we did not have that confidence. On the second question, I certainly cannot, I don't know about Ban Ki-moon's statement, and I certainly can't either justify it or condemn it, and wasn't involved with it. But the standard position for many international organizations is urging nonviolent mechanisms of change. And I'm just guessing that the United Nations at this point is saying, no, if you want to work towards regime change, a military alliance is not the way to do it. But that's, again, a little bit of a guess. And I'll leave, I didn't work for UNIMID, and so I'm not that knowledgeable about it, the specifics that you talk about. But I will say one thing about large peacekeeping missions. Where there is a state, large peacekeeping missions are implemented with the consent and with the collaboration of that state. And that gives them a lot of power on how that is being, how that peacekeeping mission is operating. So if you want a neutral military force, that's probably not going to happen with modern peacekeeping where there is an existing state. It's just, I think, an unrealistic expectation, the way the United Nations is constructed now and the way modern peacekeeping works.
Ahmed.
I guess on this as well, this is the problem of Gambari, the head of the peacekeeping of UNIMID, that he doesn't have peace to keep. That's why, he's trying to bring these two jobs together, peacekeeping thing and then, peacemaking. And now he's the ad hoc or interim mediator or something. He's not focusing on his original job, which is to protect the people of Darfur. Who is the spoiler? I think If we consult Sudanese people on the ground or wherever you find them, they will tell you who is the real spoiler. The real spoiler is al-Bashir regime. I think he's the source of the ongoing genocide right now in South Kordofan, who is the source and the main commander of the ongoing genocide of South Kordofan, Bunu Line, and Darfur. And he is right now actually, supporting this war by proxy inside the South. And he has a strategy of destabilization to the newly established state in the South. So the real spoiler of the regime. But what we need is the international community to have will to remove al-Bashir. If they want just to say Bashar al-Assad lost legitimacy and then Hosni Mubarak lost legitimacy, I think actually they have to say also al-Bashir lost legitimacy, because al-Bashir is wanted by the International Criminal Court and he is the source of the instability which is now undermining the regional and international peace and security. Al-Bashir is responsible. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, regime change, the earlier question, it doesn't necessarily require a military response. I don't think we're going to get one anytime soon internationally. But I do believe that there are things that can be done now that can hasten and accelerate a change in Sudan, transformation in Sudan. First, diplomatic surge, the AU mediation is flawed. We could do another 3.5 hours for anybody who wants to wait and listen for the problems that they have. But nevertheless, it's what we have. And the article that was being cited earlier about the negotiations also pointed out that the U.S. had some junior staffer there patrolling the hallways, hoping to get a little readout from the parties whenever they came out of the room. This is no way to conduct negotiations over the future dispensation of oil revenue, which is one of the make or break issues of whether or not the Sudan and South Sudan are going to go back to war. We need a major investment. Other countries who have an interest, particularly China, needs a major investment in a peace process now to deal with the problems between the North and the South and the internal problems in Sudan. Comprehensively deal with it once and for all now. Secondly, sanction the spoilers, however you define them, those that undermine peace. And then thirdly, support the peace advocates, the democracy advocates that are battling in many different ways to try to bring change to their countries. And with all the transformation that is occurring now in North Africa and the Middle East, we can't allow the status quo to continue in Sudan for another year.
And Luca, on local violence?
Yeah, I think for the local violence, I think it's a good question. Usually in any conflict analysis, people tend to put us at macro level. And when we get the peace, it's at that level. And we tend to forget the micro analysis of conflict. I did some work specifically.
It's being recorded, so do you mind stand up? Speak in the microphone.
Oh, I can use these. It's fine.
Yeah, use this one. Good. Otherwise, the viewers abroad will not get
really, I mean, I'm talking about the conflict analysis. So usually we tend to forget the micro level. I did some work in Sudan looking at the social capital of what happened to the people during the war, intra community violence, and what happened to the relationship over time. And I did it within certain communities. And what I discovered is that we have a lot of hidden tension among the communities, within the communities and across the communities over years. They suppress this tension with the hope that they're going to have a bigger problem. And when that bigger problem is finished, those hidden tensions, they tend to be quite fragile and they could be triggered at any time. And what you are seeing in Southern Sudan is that people are going to the past and how they deal with the past. And that is a very important issue, because you see these communities, even during the war, they did not having the same level of violence with themselves. It is after the war. And what is happening, you see that the institutions that could provide justice are not there. And also the traditional system has been eroded. And that is where you could see the problem, the tensions are coming. And for me, is even in this article, which I have written in the African Affairs, is that what we are seeing in the South now is those tensions are coming up because either it could be issue of resources, but it's deeper than the resources. And it is very important that the issue of reconciliation, especially at the community level, especially with the civil society organization, with the churches, at the community level, these will the pillars with which you can really build a good peace. And we are doing a lot of good network about the micro-level analysis of the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This brings the official part of our gathering to an end, but there is food and wine outside. We can continue. Let me thank the panel for a wonderful presentation.